Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Touraj Parang is a veteran Silicon Valley dealmaker. He is a seasoned entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and M&A expert who has sat in almost every seat around the table structuring, negotiating a strategic transaction since the late 1990s, including as a corporate attorney and legal powerhouses SGR and Melvin E. Myers. Those are two good law firms. Being a lawyer, I know them. Obviously, I've done deals with them. But don't worry, folks. He's moved on from being an attorney. He has been a founder, executive, and trusted advisor to several fast-growing technology startups with exits to LinkedIn, Instacart, Vistaprint, Postmates, and Amplitude, among others. He has also spent nearly a decade on the acquirer side of M&A deals as a corporate development executive at Webs and GoDaddy. Exit path draws on Touraj's decades-long unique experience involving hundreds of M&A transactions, strategic partnerships, and venture capital investments totaling billions of dollars in aggregate value. So we're going to be talking about his book and other services called Exit Path, which I'm excited about. He is currently the president and chief operating officer of Serve Robotics, which he helped spin out of Uber, and an operating advisor at Peer VC, an early-stage venture capital firm, where he enjoys collaborating with and providing strategic guidance to mission-driven entrepreneurs. Touraj, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Hey, excited to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction, Corey.
Yeah, I mean, what a background in so many aspects of M&A and VC and deal work. And I want to get into all of that and all the wisdom you can provide our audience. But before we go there, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because my guess is, an expert in the M&A space and playing all these different roles and maybe even, being an author of a book might not have been it, but you tell me.
No, yeah. I think that probably the only common thread from my childhood to now is the fact that I have always loved technology and innovation. I remember kind of buying these magazines back then. There were physical copies that they were like, science and technology magazines about the latest gadgets. And I would just marvel at them. And I never imagined myself to actually be in the driver's seat of a tech company or be actually building things. But I was a consumer, an avid, curious kid, really interested in what's the latest technologies. So I'm glad that life had it in store for me to be back and involved with technology the way I am today. And I just couldn't be happier.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if anybody listened to the names we rattled off there, they were, for the most part, in the tech space. So, all right. One more question looking back. What was your first deal of any type? Could have been something small when you were a kid or in your career, whatever comes to mind.
I remember, actually, this is a great question. No one has asked me this before, but I remember that my first deal was selling a box of knives, Cutco knives, to a friend's mother. And they were so kind to kind of buy the whole thing. I was so happy. And that was like my first sales experience.
Love it.
I was in high school, 10th grade.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about, the journey a little bit. I mean, obviously you started out on the legal side like I've been for many, many years. And as is true for actually a lot of my colleagues, they end up moving, or at least some of them end up moving over to the business side. So talk about that journey a little bit and maybe what would be the first thing that's interesting, for me, and I think some of the audience is, perspective of being a lawyer on deals and then a perspective of being, involved on the principal side, whether it's on the buy or sell side. Talk a little bit about that.
So, when I went to law school, in my mind, I wanted to work with tech companies and represent startups. And in my mind, as a lawyer representing startups, I felt that I would be really in the midst of action. I would be helping them create things, structure deals, things like that. So when I actually started practicing law, though, that was a bit of a rude awakening for me, because at least for a junior associate, the practice of law is not that.
Right.
A lot of times I had to fix signature blocks and make sure that the commas are in the right place. And so pretty quickly, I got a bit disillusioned with the work I was doing.
Sure.
And especially because I had that ambition. Like if my mindset was something else, perhaps I would have been quite happy. But I felt that I am far from where I wanted to be in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation. So I sort of, in a panicked evening, I sent a bunch of emails and requests to my Stanford alumni network. I went to Stanford as an undergrad. And luckily, someone kind of heard me and decided to help out and connected me with his spouse, who happened to be a partner at a European venture capital firm that wanted to open an office here in the US, in Palo Alto. And we hit it off. I became the first associate they hired for their US office. That was the year 2000. Timing was a bit tricky. As soon as I signed on that dotted line and left the lucrative legal profession, the whole market crashed all around me. But hey, being an investor, VC was quite a good learning opportunity. I kind of got an MBA on the job as an associate in a venture capital firm.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those lessons. And listen, I hear, it's interesting I'll go back for a second until you comment on the legal side. Yeah, I mean, no question, as a young associate, at big firms, I mean, yeah, it's proofreading and making copies and commas and due diligence and, whatever. Yeah, it's definitely not the exciting part of the deal. I felt very fortunate that, coming out of school in the 80s when things were growing like crazy, I had the opportunity to do what the partners told me if I committed to the deal side. I was like 50 level work in my second year because they were hiring all these young associates. So I got this accelerated learning, which was phenomenal because I'm like you, I couldn't, and it's also the reason I went on my own. I like the strategic side of things. I like the, helping really shape the deal, not just documenting it. And I think maybe the only reason I stayed in law is that I had this accelerated opportunity and then I got a shingle and became an entrepreneur 6 years out of school. I could never, there are attorneys who are, 8-10 years in doing their 400th bond deal. I couldn't do it. So I'm with you.
I know, all power to them. It's hard work.
Oh yeah, no, and a lot of credit. It's just not me. It's not you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So all right. So you come over to the VC side. You mentioned that there's a lot of lessons you learned there. Let's talk about some of those. Like what did you, what are some of those early lessons? And I know that's going to lead into other experience and eventually a lot of what goes into your exit path, book and work. But so, yeah, let's talk about those a little bit.
Yeah. One interesting lesson I learned was that, first as a lawyer, I thought what really mattered were the words and the contracts and the documents, right? And then I sort of started practicing law and then I realized there's more to it. Then I kind of felt when I was a VC, I went into it thinking that, okay, all that mattered were the numbers, right? So I went from words to numbers. So Microsoft Word to Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets and like building an elegant financial model. And look how beautiful this forecast is and how elegant this model is with these drivers and these assumptions. And we can do X, Y, and Z. And then I realized, to influence people, to actually make deals happen, you need more than words and numbers. You need actual relationships. To influence people, you need to kind of get at their hearts and minds and be able to communicate that. You build a story and really care about people and build genuine relationships outside of business. The business thing happens. And really one thing I say in my book is that, companies don't do deals, people do. Yes. And so it's all about relationships. And that's something that a lesson I learned and I was lucky enough to learn and also have role models that exemplify that quite well, that I could see, okay, well, these people are amazingly successful and they're the most humble people I could find and most genuine, most giving people. So that I would say the biggest lesson, if I could impart to my kids and other entrepreneurs, is that really pay attention to relationships.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love this progression, right? Words, numbers, relationships. Like it's, we're getting off the page into into the real world, right?
Indeed, yes.
All right, so things evolved, and now you make another move, right? From being on the VC side to going in-house on in various tech companies and doing the corporate development side of it. Let's talk about a little bit about that transition. What led you there, and what'd you learn?
Yeah, I mean, when I finally felt like I had enough experience and savings saved put aside, I actually tried my hand at being an entrepreneur. So my first startup, Jackster, started in 2005. And it was a telecommunications company. You could think of it like as WhatsApp or Telegram before we had apps on our iPhones.
Right.
And it took off. We had found the magical combination of things that people needed. They wanted to combine their social networks with their actual phone, and these phones were, again, feature phones without apps on them. And we grew. We went to like 1 million users in the first month. We went to 10 million users within the first year. So you can imagine we had all sorts of VCs and investors wanting to join us, and we had great advisors, and we were riding high. So 2005 to 2009, things were great, except the last year, right? We hit the 2008, 2009 downturn, and everything started falling apart. And we were like, our mantra was grow, grow, grow. Now everybody was saying, show me the money. We didn't have any money to really show in terms of customers paying for our services. So we had to kind of really pivot fast and realize that we didn't have enough runway time to do all the experiments needed to tweak our product to be a profitable product. So the alternative was to sell the business. And they had made a key strategic decision, which was not to bother with courting acquirers or creating strategic partnerships, because who needed that? We're virally growing. We're on top of the world. Why bother, right? And that came to haunt us because there was no one around that wanted to buy us, and any kind of cold emails that we send or even warm introductions kind of fizzled out. And within 6 months, we had to do a quick fire sale. And, all these hopes, aspirations, hard work of an amazing team of 70 were sort of went down the drain because of that critical strategic mistake we made. With my next startups, where I joined a kind of an established company that had reached its kind of local maxima and was looking for a breakout scenario, I joined as a head of strategy and corp dev. And my mission was to figure out, how do I take this from a $20 million company to a $100 million plus company? Yes. And we were lucky enough that once we did some analysis of our data, of our users, we hit a critical insight, which was that we were a generic website creation platform, but we realized that if we focused and catered to the needs of our small business clientele, they were the ones that paid the most, they were happiest, they were kind of retained the longest. That was the magic formula. So we really changed the company to be a online presence tool for small businesses. This repositioning just did wonders for us. And we had to do a number of acquisitions to fill in the holes. And we had to create some strategic partnerships to bring in mobile CRM tools, other sort of social media tools at the time. This was in 2009, 2010. So when we brought all these under one roof, then we started getting inbound interest from strategic acquirers, public and private companies. And I kind of ran that process, and we successfully sold to Vistaprint for close to $120 million. It was more than 12x our forward revenues. And it was a phenomenal deal for everybody involved. So, radically different results, but just tweaking that one assumption that, hey, we didn't pursue strategic partners, and then we really went after them in the other startup.
I love that contrast. And listen, one of the it really aligns with the fundamental reason why I started this podcast, which is really, my premise is that, every company spends time on organic growth, and they should, because they need to get customers and clients. But such smaller percentage of the companies spend any time on deal-driven growth. And that's just another crucial, and your most successful companies do both. And, it's often like, a lot of times when my marketing team promotes it, we talk about, because you always try to hit pain points, right? So it's like, oh, you're not growing as fast as you'd like. Well, here's another way. But I love the example you gave because it really does apply to everybody, whether your growth is not where you want it, whether you have actually solid growth but want it faster, or and this highlights the example of that other extreme where your organic growth is phenomenal at whatever metrics you are, and that's probably the time when it's even easier to avoid like strategic partnerships and other types of inorganic growth kind of deals. But it makes you so much more vulnerable, right? And this contrast you said between those two experiences really shows the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know when the market is going to go south. So it's always great to have these strategic, inorganic sort of avenues, options. Options create value, right? You can't go on the market today and get an option for nothing. Yeah, you have to pay for it. Same with startups. When you create strategic optionality for yourself, you actually become a more valuable company just by that sheer act itself. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I'd love to get your take on this because some of the things that, my listeners are probably tired about me hearing, but there's a reason why I repeat certain things because, you got to get it in there. I often talk about the fact that, I think most of us know that there's a different mindset of an entrepreneur versus an employee, right? Right. And I never say that with any kind of judgment. I think one's not necessarily better for the other in general, but they're better for certain people, right? Like I'm unemployable is my joke, right? So, but what I also say, and it's less talked about, is that you can be an entrepreneur but not be a deal maker. There's another mindset shift that happens, right?
Yes,
to become a deal maker, to start looking at opportunities that are on the deal side. So talk to me a little bit about your view on that mindset conversation, because I think that's where everything starts, right? If you don't have the mindset of being a deal maker, how are you going to even think about or look for the opportunities to do deals?
Absolutely. I think that is such a critical point to underline, which is like you start with the mindset, and what's underpinning that mindset is that the realization as to why do you need to bother, right? So are you just doing it for the intrinsic value of it, which I think there's intrinsic value in creating relationships and building out. So therefore we're social animals. So we actually do get personal fulfillment from having a good community and support network around us. But beyond that, put the intrinsic value aside, there's a utility to having these partnerships, which is, again, in times it can add new revenue lines to you. It can bring in products. It can fill in the gaps in some of your offering that you couldn't otherwise. It can be a new distribution channel for you. I mean, there are all sorts of strategic partners. It could just be a co-marketing. So there are all these things that you're sort of leaving on the table and not capturing when you're not in the market doing strategic partnerships. And then there's this, I would say, the greatest benefit is that many of these strategic partners can become acquirers. And you need to have built a history with someone before they become interested in actually buying your company. You can't just send a deck and say, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about selling my company. Are you interested? Things don't happen that way. It usually, in my tenure as 7-year on the acquirer side at GoDaddy, on average, we did like 40 deals when I was there. And on average, there were more than a year of prior relationship with the targets. Right. It was very seldom that someone, a banker or an entrepreneur, comes to us and says, hey, I'm interested in buying or selling my startup. Are you interested? It's like, how do those timelines align? Because we have our own roadmap of what we want to buy. We have a whole pipeline. Also, if we don't know someone, the acquisitions are the most important deals any company can make. And when so much is riding on it, like even Walmart CEO, I heard it on a podcast with Tim Ferriss, I believe. He mentioned that, those are the most hardest decision in his career has been acquisitions. Yeah. Because they can totally tank even a big company if they make a wrong move. It's quite disruptive to them. So they need to have a lot of confidence and trust in who they're going to partner with when they buy your startup as an entrepreneur. So those relationships are the glue that makes those deals happen. So I can't, and that's really the thesis of my book is all about building these relationships. How do you go about it? How do you start with the mindset? And why does it matter? And time spent with potential partners is critical. You can't cram a relationship into a lunch meeting.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing about, especially, a lot of the deals you worked on were big buyers, right? Buying up startup and smaller companies. And, the other thing, and I love your input on this, and I do want to delve more specifically into the book in a moment, but, the other thing that big companies always have is the decision on whether they're going to build or buy, right? So if they don't know about you, forget the fact that, who knows, maybe they get to know someone else who's doing what you're doing, but they also have this other option called build it. Yeah. And if they don't know you exist or whatever, they may go build it. But if they know you exist and there's some relationship there, whatever, it's very often a much better move because it accelerates things for them, and you get a good price, but for them the cost of development could be as much, and even more so the time, right? Speed to market, those kind of things make a difference. So building those relationships also helps you get them the potential buyer in that mindset, right, of potentially buying instead of building.
Yes, mindset and mind share. Yeah, right. So you have to occupy somewhere be on their horizon. One of the problems with actually my first startup was that because we didn't cultivate those relationships, they were actually our competitors with inferior product, less users, less pedigree in terms of venture capitalist backing.
Yes,
all that got sold at such massive premiums around the same time that we went under. Yeah. And the people who bought them didn't even bother talking to us.
Right.
Probably didn't know we existed, or they had their own image of what we were based on what they had read in the media, but they never bothered talking to us. And they ended up with an inferior product and paying far more than what they would have paid had they been talking to us. Yes. So, the mind share is so critical.
Yeah, love that. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to CoreyKupfer.com/assessment. That's CoreyKupfer.com/assessment and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show. All right. So, listen, there's hours more we can talk about your experience, but I want to get to the book, and we'll see if we have time to come back. And, I'm sure we'll hear more. A lot of your past experience inform what you have in the book.
Yes.
So exit path, you alluded to it, a moment ago about, one of the premises is to have people create these relationships, these strategic alliances, in order to set them up for sale. But to give us more, detail on the book and
sure,
and the premise and what it covers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it really goes through my history, that those two radical differences that we just talked about between Jackster and the failed experiment with Jackster and the success story with Webs.com, but also a lot of other entrepreneurs that I have coached and mentored over the years. I've been an angel investor and VC. So I've seen a lot of these deals happen also as a lawyer. So I've kind of had the 360 view, being on multiple sides of not the same deal, but different deals. And so I kind of summarized that, and I kind of take the entrepreneur sort of step by step, starting with the mindset, starting with making the case why it is important for you to think about your exit strategy. And the sooner you start, actually, the better the outcome would be. The problem is that most entrepreneurs have spent less than 4 hours on their exit strategy, if they have at all. 40% have not spent any time at all. And so that's a big problem. And then when you juxtapose that with the fact that for every IPO there are 30 acquisitions.
Yes.
The most likely successful outcome for any entrepreneur is a sale to an acquirer.
Yes.
IPO is a pipe dream. Most startups fail anyway.
Right.
1 out of 30 do an IPO. The other sell to an acquirer. So when you juxtapose that with the time people spend on pursuing an IPO, it's completely out of whack. And so that's what I'm trying to correct. So in the first part of the book, I talk about this dilemma and how the results can be very different. And then I kind of walk the reader through how do you create your exit strategy? What are the things you should consider? What's the long game, which is, playing a multi-year game here?
Yes.
And what's the short game, which when you're you're about to sell your startup, you're thinking about selling your startup within the next 12 months, there are very concrete steps you can take. And throughout this whole process, you want to increase your leverage as an entrepreneur. You want to basically create optionality and get the best possible outcome. And that's not just necessarily financial outcome.
Sure.
To me, the best outcome is one that brings your startup closest to the executing on its original mission. We all start startups with a big dream. And a lot of times, the realization of that dream necessitates partnering up with a bigger company, with more resources, with more funding to actually take that and bring your startup to the next level. So those are the best strategic outcomes.
Love it. So there's a few different directions I want to go. Let me see where I want to go first, because there's so much in here. Let's actually talk about that strategic alliance phase, strategic partnership phase prior to when maybe one of those becomes an acquirer. So what do some of those things look like? And then also, sometimes you hear hesitation from some entrepreneurs, right, to do anything with bigger companies, right? Oh, they're going to find out what I'm doing. They're going to steal my technology. They're going to, all of this going on, right? So talk a little bit about that and how you address those, how much of that is real, and then also, what some of these deals look like that create these relationships that may lead to you being, having a natural buyer.
Right. Yes. No, I can tell you so many stories about that latter point on the hesitations, especially as a first-time entrepreneur with my first startup. I was really protective of our IP. In fact, Google, who could have been a major, fantastic acquirer for us, ended up acquiring another company that, again, with inferior technology, and became Google Voice. That's what Google Voice is today. That was just a competitor of ours, Grand Central, who started the same year. But they talked to us first, actually, because I had a very good friend there who made an introduction to the right team. And I threw buckets of cold ice, cold water on their heads when they started this conversation. And you know how I did that? You'll love this. By negotiating ad nauseum their NDA, their standard NDA. So they sent an NDA. It had a residuals clause. It had all those things that big companies put in there. And I went to town with that. And we spent 3 months negotiating this freaking NDA and just lost the entire momentum. They decided to go with somebody else because we were quibbling over an NDA.
Yeah.
So we basically lost the house because of our fear that Google would go and steal our technology. The reality is, there are some concerns, and you can have good lawyers advise you to write but being overly concerned about these kind of things basically means that you're putting yourself out of the game.
Yeah.
So the risk you don't take is kind of like the game you lose. And the reality is that a lot of these big companies don't have resources to go and do what you do. They much rather acquire you than go have to hire a whole new team to try to figure out what you did and recreate what you built over the past X number of years. It's just time to market, as you said. It's really critical for them. If it's something strategic for them, they would want to move on it fast. So also, you don't enter a relationship. Again, this is where the relationship first approach comes in. You don't enter a relationship by being suspicious of the other person, right? By just signaling that you don't trust them to be honorable counterparts, you're already starting on a very wrong foot. So it's a fine dance. And I actually now err on the being more open. I'm not advising anyone to do that. I don't want people to come back and tell me, they stole my technology. What did you? But I have found, at least in my history, that being more open, being more transparent breeds more transparency as well. How you approach people, it tends to be how they approach you and reciprocate. So to make a long story short, I would be a little bit less suspicious of bigger companies. Now, you don't have to reveal everything on the on the first meeting. You could start small. You could start by just sharing some limited data about what you're seeing in the market and inquiring about them and see, okay, is this a give and take situation and that both parties are sharing, or is it just you sharing and the other party is being silent and listening, which is different. But Your first question was, how do you start these strategic partnerships? It could just be, look, we are in this industry. I see a lot of commonalities in what we are doing. Perhaps we can share some information and see if there is any potential for us to collaborate down the road. It doesn't have to be anything super serious and like, oh, I'm selling my company. Would you guys be interested? I would say leave that to be something that they actually come to you and they approach you. But there is a fine dance to this that you can signal your interest gradually over time and let them be the ones that express excitement versus the other way around. And I actually, these are some of the things that I really go into detail in my book and teach entrepreneurs.
I love that. And, it's interesting because I've seen it on all ends of the spectrum when we talk about, relationship. And then we start talking about things like strategic partnerships, strategic alliances. Some folks really, all they're doing is just establishing a relationship and keeping the right person at the bigger company informed about what's going on with them. And it's very informal, right? And, it's lunch once in a while or just send them updates. And then in other cases, there are actually like a real strategic alliance kind of deal that's done where there's some work they're actually doing together as separate companies, right? That leads to a deal as well. You want to talk about that spectrum of ways to interact?
Yeah, and I think if you do have a very concrete thesis as to how your companies can collaborate on a product level, on a marketing level, then definitely, or maybe data sharing, and then you should propose that and check and see whether that's something that the other side kind of resonates with. At the very least, it should be just keeping them on a mailing list that you're kind of sending them updates about your progress every quarter, every month, depending on your cadence. Sometimes a lot of these potential strategic partners may not have a immediate partnership in mind, but they may be interested in investing in your startup. In fact, this past year, I would say strategic investors were a lot more active than venture investors, financial investors. And I continue to see that there is a lot of strategic investor activity right now in the market. At my company, Serve Robotics, I would say we have more strategic investors than we have financial investors. So, and we are a robotics company. So you can definitely go out there with a whole spectrum of options when you approach a strategic partner. And then I do think in these meetings, there should be a lot of listening, kind of really understanding what your counterparts' pain points are. What are their strategic initiatives? Don't go in there assuming you know a lot about another company. I've had this, and I actually provide an example in the book as well, where this entrepreneur came to me when I was at GoDaddy, and he thought he had it all figured out and was trying to teach me how to run this part of the business at GoDaddy. And I was like, it just was so off-putting because he didn't even bother asking us first, hey, why are you guys doing these things these ways?
Yes.
And this is my suggestion. Before he even found out, perhaps we had a reason, perhaps we had run tests to go in a certain direction. He just assumed he had figured it out and was imparting his wisdom. So I would say in those meetings, have intellectual humility, right? And let the counterparts also reveal what could be areas where you could really collaborate with them. So
yeah, love it. You talked about, the bigger companies sometimes being an investor in the smaller companies. And one of the things that maybe some of our listeners who are less experienced with deals in this area may not know is that many of these companies actually have venture funds, and divisions set up specifically for that purpose, to make investments in entrepreneurial companies with the intention of potentially, buying them at some point and supporting them along with the development, because they realize that many times these entrepreneurial companies are more innovative and creative and agile than trying to do it themselves, right?
Absolutely. Intel is a great example of that, where they have they're one of the most active investors out there, right? Intel Capital. And, part of their thesis is that actually they want to support the ecosystem of folks who would use the stuff that they build, like their chips and all that. So sometimes they are investing because they want to acquire in the future. Sometimes they're investing because they want to learn about a space, be more smart about it. Sometimes they're investing because they want to kind of joint development relationship. There's all sorts of areas, and you won't know necessarily, even those that don't have a formal venture firm or venture arm like Intel would actually sometimes invest out of their corporate development team that does investments. They may not be super active, but it may make sense. So you got to go out there, build these relationships and inquire, because there could be a lot of opportunities, again, that you're not tapping into as an entrepreneur. It would just be a matter of a couple of meetings to discover them.
That's great. All right. So I want to leave a couple of minutes for you to talk about the robotics company, because I'm interested in that. But before we go there, anything else about the book that you want, folks to know? And, obviously, and also what motivated you to write it? I mean, obviously you establish, you have all this knowledge and experience you've gained, and people ask me the same question, why I negotiate every day? Why'd you write a negotiating book? Right. And I have my answer for that, but I'm curious as to, what motivated you, and then if there's anything else you want to say about the book.
Well, I felt that, throughout my career, I've had so many great mentors. I've been so privileged to work with so many wonderful entrepreneurs that I felt that I should kind of write these down somewhere. I could have done a series of blog posts, but I didn't think that they would get it wouldn't all be there, and it wouldn't probably get to as many people as a book would. So this was at least my thinking. I was lucky to have a book agent and a great publisher in McGraw-Hill, great editor. So they all helped shape this book to be what it is today. Then it got endorsed by Adam Grant and many other of my favorite authors like Scott Belsky. So the journey of writing a book has been fantastic. And I would say the most important part, gratifying thing about writing a book, the process, was that I became a student of my own art. Yes. And you may have even noticed it when you were doing it, that I actually learned a lot more about what I was doing, and I became a lot more of a conscious participant in what I was doing day to day. I could kind of step out and say, okay, well, how did this conversation, negotiation go? What did I do right? What did the other part do right? What could have gone better, right? So that's part of it. And then the other part was, I truly am a cheerleader for entrepreneurs. I want more entrepreneurs to succeed. Yes. It pains me when someone calls me and says, hey, I would love some help selling my startup, but I have only 3 months of runway. And have you talked to any strategic partner? Have you built? And they haven't done any. And that just really pains me, because that's value lost to the society as a whole. So I kind of wrote the book that I wish I had when I did my first startup. So that's kind of like a convoluted answer to your question, but there were many reasons. But I'm so happy I did it.
No, I mean, your point about the writing process is really right on, at least my experience. It's funny. The fundamental, I wrote a first draft of my book, and it was, this is good. The story's great, whatever. But there was something missing, and I couldn't, I just couldn't, there was something missing. And I actually had unfortunately for a tough reason, but my dad passed away while I was writing the book. And I literally laid it down for 6 months, while I was and then I came back to it. And when I came back, in a way, the book, that was a benefit, because I was able to step away from it. And then when I came back from it, and I realized that there was a fundamental framework that underlied everything I had been doing in negotiating, but it was unconscious, right? And so my whole, my book is Authentic Negotiating: Clarity, Detachment, and Equilibrium, CDE. That fundamental framework, it's not like it didn't exist. I was using it. I just didn't have it distinguished, because I never had to distinguish it, because I wasn't training people on it. I wasn't writing about it. It was just something I was doing. And I'm always fascinated by this conversation. People have heard me use the phrase of unconscious competence, right? A lot of the people have mastery in whatever they're doing. They can't necessarily teach other people how to do it, because they don't know what they do, right? Bob Proctor is one of my mentors, who's passed away recently, used to talk about that all the time, right? Unconscious competence. So I was unconscious about that fundamental framework and the way I did stuff. I used it, but it wasn't there. And in order, the only way that really came out of was saying that there's something missing, in the book. And then when I rewrote the book with that framework, it changed everything, and it made me realize that I do have a framework that I use. Right? I didn't realize that previously.
That is amazing. That's such a great story, and I have had moments like that throughout as well. So that's really interesting to hear.
I love it. All right, I want to before I ask you my final two questions, I want to close with what you're up to now, because you've got the book. Are you still working with entrepreneurs to help them, do this stuff. I know you have the robotics company as well. So
Yes.
talk about everything that you're doing currently.
Yes, well, so the robotics company, I'm president and COO, Chief Operating Officer of Serve Robotics. We are autonomous sidewalk delivery robot that does deliveries right now for Uber Eats and 7-Eleven and other partners in LA area. And so super exciting. It's a project that started inside Postmates by a very good friend of mine, Ali Kashani. He has a very interesting TED Talk as well. I highly recommend your audience to check it out if they're interested in robotics and the future of our cities with robots. And, when Postmates got acquired by Uber, Ali and I were talking and we were saying, look, there's a lot of potential here for this to be an independent company. In fact, Ali had that in mind before even Postmates was acquired by Uber. So he went to the management team and they agreed that the potential for this technology was a lot more than Uber itself could capitalize on within its own four walls. So we spun it out. So I helped spin it out 2 years ago, and Serve became an independent venture-backed company at that point, and that's when I joined. So I've been there for 2 years now, and we are just plugging along. So that's Serve Robotics, and you can check out even the robots and videos on our website, serverobotics.com. Now, once the book got launched this past fall, I also came out with the audiobook in November. I've been getting a lot of inbound interest from entrepreneurs who would like me to kind of do some coaching or advisory work with them. So on select occasions, I do also work with entrepreneurs to help them through the both exit strategy creation and then exit strategy execution, kind of figuring out how they build that best options and execute on them for their startup.
Great. Listen, there aren't that many people. A lot of us have a lot of deal experience in various ways, but all the different angles you've come at it from are really fascinating. So I know the book is great. I actually bought it and started, and started it. I haven't finished it yet, but so far it's been, it's been great, and I love the stories and the perspective, that you bring to it. And definitely check out the robotics. This is an area that I'm just generally interested in as well. And we were talking in our pre-call. And I've seen the ones that are in various places that are, that are going along the street, and it's like it's the coolest thing in the world. It's like It's wild.
Yes.
All right. So you gave that website. Where else can they find the book or any other contact information?
The book is on Amazon and Audible for the audio version, as well as anywhere else that you kind of purchase your local bookstore. If they don't carry it, ask them to carry it. But I have its own website, exitpath.net. I couldn't get the .com even though I was at GoDaddy. Those are hard to come by. So exitpath.net, it has more information about me, how to contact me, as well as information about the book. Also, I'm on LinkedIn and other social platforms like Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. Touraj, my last question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom from all people from oppression around the world to the reason I'm an entrepreneur and I haven't had a boss in decades. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Oh, absolutely. Freedom, I think, is the ability to pursue your dream for me. And that's why my family actually left Iran when I was 10 years old, because we didn't have the freedom to be who we wanted to be, right? And I think as an entrepreneur, you have great freedom to create the future. And I think that's why I kind of cherish being an entrepreneur and working with entrepreneurs, because we are building the future.
Love it. Touraj Parang, thank you so much for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Corey, I loved our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.corykupfer.com/dealden. That's corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.